Welcome back one and all. Trust you enjoyed your lunch, and delighted to kick off the afternoon session with two speakers. Eddie Tuttle is going to do an introduction, and Paul Nash take over then. So Eddie is Director of Policy, Research and Public Affairs with the Chartered Institute of Building, and just let's acknowledge the lads who travelled from the UK to be with us today. CIOB were the first and inaugural sponsor of our conference when it started in 2011. There was a lot of hard work at the time by Joe Collier, Thomas Lenine from Western Branch CIOB, helped us sort out sponsorship with CIOB nationally, and that's endured to this day, and we're very thankful and very appreciative of that. Joining Eddie today is Paul Nash, is past president of CIOB. Paul is currently a member of the Industry Safety Steering Group and Procurement Advisory Group, which was set up to advise the UK government on building safety in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire. Paul also chaired the CIOB's Construction Quality Commission, which was established to investigate the issue of quality in construction and what needs to be done to improve it. He's followed high-profile incidents such as the Edinburgh schools reports and where blocks fell off the front of the schools, Grenfell Tower, and of course ourselves in Ireland have had similar issues over recent years. So today the gents will consider quality, competence and professionalism in the post-Grenfell world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Eddie Tuttle, the Director for Policy and Research at the Chartered Institute of Building. Just a few words about the CIOB. We are the largest professional body for construction management in the world. We have 45,000 members. 80% of those are based in the UK and Ireland. We have widespread global reach in the Far East, with sizable membership in China and Hong Kong. We also have members in the Middle East, Malaysia, Oceania, and the Americas as well. I mean, it goes without saying, we actually don't have that long this afternoon, so I'm quite keen to get into the meat of the conversation and presentation. But quality, professionalism, and competence are issues very much to the fore in the UK following the incidents at Grenfell and the Dame Judith Hackett review and report. And, you know, there's serious questions being asked about how we, as professional bodies and as professionals on the ground, actually deliver quality products that actually stand up to the right level of standards and meet the right requirements in terms of product as well. So a number of issues that Paul will take you through from a UK perspective. I can say that a number of the issues that have occurred in the UK are also issues that affect all parts of the globe as well, and there's been incidences in Malaysia, Australia, Hong Kong, China, America as well, which have had similar consequences in their own ways as Grenfell has had in the UK. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Eddie. Good afternoon, everyone. I know what it's like to be sat out there after lunch, so I'm going to try and keep this as moving as quickly as possible, trying to keep it as interesting as possible. I think there's an opportunity later for some questions and answers later on in the session. So if anyone's got any burning question, please do keep hold of them and we'll hopefully have a chance to answer them at the end. So in this presentation, I want to take you back first of all in time, and I want to take you back to 2017 when Eddie and I actually got a phone call from the Minister of Housing in Scotland to say, would you come up to a roundtable meeting we're having to discuss the findings of a report into schools, primary schools in Edinburgh. I've got to be honest with you, I didn't know anything about this until I turned up at this session. But what I learned during the course of that round table concerned me. As someone who'd been in the industry for a number of years, I saw an issue that, for me, pointed to some fundamental problems. But the most shocking thing for me was this statement from the report, which was that if it wasn't for a matter of timing and luck, then there would have been a number of injuries or fatalities. And to put that in perspective, that wall is where school children would queue up in the morning to go into their lessons. And I said to Eddie when I came out, I said, Eddie, I don't get this. I mean, I started out in construction on sites as a site manager and then moved into consultancy. I said, but this is basic building technology. These aren't complicated buildings. This is a cavity wall. How could this happen? And this wasn't just one school. This was 17 schools with exactly the same issues. It so happened that actually in the same month this report came out, announcing that Bovis were having to set aside £7 million to compensate their customers for poor quality homes. And again, it was a statement from their interim chief executive. The chief executive before him had obviously left as a consequence of this, which basically said, and if you read between the lines of that, we were really putting cost and time ahead of quality. So what was suffering? Well, ultimately quality. And as we know, even today, that is still very much an issue for the house building industry. It was shortly followed by this report, which was produced by YouGov on behalf of the housing charity Shelter. And this found that in England, and this is not just restricted to England, I would hasten to add, but this report was focused on England, over 50% of new build houses were suffered from defects of one sort or another. And again, what interested me was this quote from the report, which said that really the system was failing families. So this wasn't just about our industry, this was about the impact our industry was having on people's lives and their livelihoods, and I'll come back to that in a short while. So clearly there was an issue with the industry. Coincidentally, and I wrote a piece at the time as a consequence of this, I stumbled upon this report into a fire in which 6 people had lost their lives in Southwark in July 2009, Lakanal House. Now, for those of you who've been following the Grenfell inquiry, if you haven't already, you'll be aware of Lakanal House. You'll certainly hear a lot more people talking about it over the coming weeks and months of the inquiry, because it's incredibly relevant, because many of the faults that were identified that led to this fire were actually faults that would later on come to be part of the cause of the Grenfell Tower fire. Fundamentally, the report found there were breaches of fire-resistant structures, a lack of compartmentation in suspended ceilings, and a failure to provide smoke seals around doors. And interestingly enough, this issue around the whole issue of fire breaks, fire stopping, was also an issue for the Edinburgh Schools report, because again, if you look at Edinburgh Schools, the report points to the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that the gable end wall collapsed, actually the lack of fire stopping meant that in the event of a fire, it would have been fatal anyway. Now this is interesting, because doing what I do, and I spend a lot of time reading and a lot of time keeping up to date with what's going on, you still stumble every now and then upon a quote from an old report that just causes you to stop. And this was actually something that came out in the inquest in March 2013, which actually pointed to the fact that the cladding was also an issue that contributed to the spread of fire in the case of Lakanal House. Wasn't just an issue in the UK either, because the following year, after the inquiry, after the investigation into the Lakanal House fire, there was a fire at a tower block in Melbourne, Australia. And again, in this case specifically, one of the issues highlighted was the use of aluminium composite material panels. So we could see here that there were some strong indicators that there were some underlying issues. In this case, there were no fatalities, and the report specifically points to the fact that the presence of sprinklers and the fire alarm systems were a contributor to the fact that nobody lost their lives in this fire. And then, as we all know, in June 2017, on the 14th of June, there was the fire at Grenfell Tower, which claimed the lives of 72 people. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that a little bit later on in the presentation. So from the CIB's perspective, we knew that this was an issue for the industry. It was an issue of quality, it was an issue of standards, and ultimately it was now an issue also of building safety, the safety of those people who use the buildings that we create. We felt that we needed to act, we needed to do something about that. So in June 2017, we established and launched a commission of past presidents. And the purpose of that commission really was to investigate the issue of quality in construction. and what needed to be done to improve it. And we decided from our point of view, and it'll be interesting because you'll see some of the feedback we had from people when we looked into this, that what we really wanted to do was that we wanted to encourage and promote a culture of quality. And this word pride came up time and time again. We wanted to instill pride in the buildings and infrastructure that we created. But we also appreciated that in order to do that, in order to understand what the underlying issues are, we had to really understand the behaviours, both at an individual and a corporate level. And importantly, we wanted to understand not just those issues or behaviours that were preventing good quality on site, but also those that were promoting good quality outcomes. So in October 2017, we issued a call for evidence because what we wanted was feedback from our members and more widely across the industry into what people were seeing in their day-to-day lives on construction projects. What I'd like to do now is share with you some of the feedback that we received. So one of the questions we asked, the first question we looked at, was the management of quality. And we asked the question, do you believe that the current management of quality is adequate in terms of supervision? 76% of respondents said no. In terms of sign-off, 84% of respondents said no. And in terms of workmanship, 82%. So it was clear to us that from the perspective of the industry, there were serious concerns about the way in which quality was being managed in our industry. We then looked at the issue of regulation, codes and standards, and we asked, do you think that existing regulations, codes and standards are adequate to achieve good quality construction? In this case, 55% of respondents said no. Not as significant, but still the majority. And finally, we looked at the issue of education in the sector. And we asked, is construction quality taught effectively in educational establishments? 74% said no. Interestingly enough, on the Commission of Past Presence, we had Professor Roger Flanagan, who had already put his hand up to the fact that from an academic perspective, there was too much focus on quality systems and not enough on how you actually physically deliver quality on site. And we looked at certification systems. Are they fit for purpose? And 54% said no. So we had quantitative data back from those who'd responded, which kind of underlined the issues that we had, but not really pointing to what the solutions would be. But we also had an awful lot of qualitative responses. People wrote reams and reams to us about their own experiences and what they saw as being some of the underlying issues. And I'd like to share some of those with you. First of these may be not so surprising for those of us on construction sites, too much reliance on paper-based quality control procedures. A lack of site supervision from designers and engineers. This was a recurring theme, this issue of the decline of clerk of works role, but more specifically the lack of an assigned responsibility on site for inspection and sign-off. An acknowledgement, and this is again something that got picked up from the Hackett report, which I'll mention in a moment, is this focus on regulations being about compliance to a minimum standard only. So driving everything down to what do we need to comply with standards, not necessarily what do we need to deliver a building that is both the right quality and safe. This desire to strive for quality that went beyond the codes and the standards. The recognition as someone who started my career as a management trainee on site, that this resonated with me, that actually the experience of on-the-job training is essential. There's only so much you can learn in the classroom. Classroom training is important, but there is no substitute for experience of actually being on site and seeing how construction projects are delivered. And this theme here again, which probably will resonate with some of you, is this focus on the bottom line by the contractor, which means there aren't sufficient resources allocated to quality on projects. These were some of the quotes that we had back from people. Cost seems to be the main decider. Pride and professionalism are taking a back seat. Make it personal, generate a culture of pride, comes up again. And this recognition also that corporate culture is the starting point. So there's a complete behavioural change that's required from the top down and from the bottom up as well. So we'd issued our call for evidence, we'd collected all the data and information, now we needed to decide what we need to do to try and make a difference. So we decided to focus primarily on promoting best practice and raising standards of education in quality management. The first thing we did was we launched a 2-day construction quality management course. It's usually this point in the presentation where I ask if anyone in the room has done the course, because I'm always interested in feedback. And if anyone has and you want to come up to me afterwards and give me your feedback, I'd be very happy to receive it. The course has been very well received. I've spoken to a number of people who've been on it. Fundamentally, the course is there to explain about the fundamentals of quality management, introduce people to the relevant codes and standards, and also teach people how you apply those ideas, those principles of best practice in your day-to-day jobs as well. So it's very much a practical focus of the course as well. Last year in September, we launched a code of quality management. It's available to download. There's a link on the presentation, which I think we're intending to circulate afterwards as well. The code has 6 sections, but essentially it splits into 2 parts. The first part really provides the background, some context from an industry stance in terms of what's been happening, what else is going on in industry to try and raise standards of quality. But the bulk of the document is a practical tool. It's a quality management plan broken down by trades with guidance and reference to the relevant standards. It's very much intended to be, and I always stress this, a practitioner's tool. It's meant to be something that people take away, they take apart, and they use in their day-to-day work. And we are very keen to receive feedback from people on the code. As I said, there's a link there if anyone wants to download it. We're currently working on an update to the code, recognition that to some extent we're already getting feedback from people, but also that standards and best practice is constantly changing. And then in October last year, we launched a MOOC. Now, many of you in the room might be familiar with a MOOC. I recently became familiar with MOOC. For those who are uninitiated, it's a massive open online course. It's free. Anyone can go online and join in. It runs over 3 weeks, this particular course. And it's intended, again, to provide an introduction to the basic principles of quality management. But the important thing to stress about this, it's interactive. And to put that in context, we ran this course last October. We had 1,775 people participate in the course from over 110 countries. I had access. I was able to log on and see people's comments and even respond to some of the comments. It's really interesting to see how the people react and respond to not just the learning, but the comments from other people from all over the world. And if anyone's interested in the room today, again, the link is there. We've just launched the course again. Such was its success first time round. So if anyone's interested, you can go online this week. The fact it launched on the 2nd doesn't mean you missed the deadline, because you can do the course any time to suit you. And it works out roughly to be about 2 hours a week over 3 weeks. And again, if you get involved in the online forums, it can be a lot more than that, as you can imagine. But again, I'd commend the course to you. And then later this year, we're planning to pilot a quality certification scheme. Now, this will be effectively the next level on from the 2-day course to allow people basically to have a qualification in quality management. And we're basing it on our conservation certification scheme, which has also been very successful and has now been running for, I think, 3 years, about 3 years. So we have a precedent for this. The work's ongoing at the moment to try and complete this and launch a pilot. So again, watch this space. We'll keep you informed of what's happening from that perspective. So in some respects, from a CIB perspective, most of our effort and energy has been directed at trying to raise standards of education in order to promote best practice. And hopefully through that then, not just to increase the recognition and understanding, but also to promote changes in people's behaviours and attitudes on site. Because all of us in this room, whether you're in the industry, whether you're learning, or whether you've been in it for a very long time, we all have a responsibility for quality in the industry. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to say a little bit about the building safety programme and Post-Grenfell. It's something, as Martin mentioned earlier, I'm very closely involved in because I sit on the Industry Safety Steering Group, which is chaired by Dame Judith Hackett, and that group is there to provide strategic level oversight of all the work that's going on across the UK government's building safety programme. So it was set up in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire, and you will see this comment appear in many of the reports about the focus really being on ensuring that residents of high-rise residential buildings are safe and feel safe now and in the future. A lot of the work to date through government has been focused on cladding replacement. I could give a whole other presentation on cladding and what's going on there, and you'll have seen a lot of reporting on this in the press, but it is an ongoing issue in the context of high-risk residential buildings. Testing of fire doors, which was a particular issue that was picked up very early on, and then the review of competencies, which I'll say a little bit about in a minute. And then this independent review of building regulations and fire safety, which was led by Dame Judith Hackett. I chaired one of the working groups that fed into that report, that was specifically at procurement. That report, which has become known as the Hackett Report, is what has led now on to the recommendations that government, UK government, are looking to adopt. There's a link there if anyone wants to see any more information about that. The final report, Building a Safer Future, which came out in May 2018, identified 4 key issues: ignorance, indifference, a lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, and inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement tools. It's a pretty damning report. It's entirely independent, which is the whole point of it, but it makes uncomfortable reading for those of us in the industry. But it's also a wake-up call to the industry that we need to change the way that we design, procure, construct, and manage buildings. This quote, which has now become quite often quoted from the report, introduced this concept of the race to the bottom, where there was an insufficient focus on delivering best quality to ensure that residents are safe and feel safe, and it being an underlying cultural issue. I mentioned earlier about competency. There's a lot more I could say about that, but we don't have time, unfortunately. But I want to say a bit about competency. One of the key streams of work that's been undertaken under the Building Safety Programme has been to look at competency across the industry and what work needs to be done to raise competency across a number of disciplines. To do this, a competence steering group was set up. That group, in August last year, published its interim review. And this was all really about trying to raise standards of competency in industry. Put this in context, there are 12 working groups and an overarching competency body report, which is the system that effectively will embrace all of these different competencies. But you can see the range of disciplines that are covered by this review of competency. CIOB has been actively involved in a number of those, including procurement, project management, site supervision as well. The significant thing to say about this, and say we don't have time to talk about it unfortunately in this presentation, but is there are a number of new roles that are going to be created through the new building safety system. One of those under Working Group 8 is that of the Building Safety Manager. But existing roles under the CDM roles, the Principal Designer and Principal Contractor, are also going to be enhanced in the context and have statutory responsibilities under the new Building Safety Act, which we expect to come into force next year. So there are significant changes coming down the pipeline in terms of the industry and the roles and responsibility of those, specifically those working on high-rise or high-risk residential buildings. Just to give some context in case you're wondering, HRRBs at the moment broadly are a category of building in which people sleep overnight. At the moment it's 18 metres and above, although the Secretary of State announced back in January that threshold is being reviewed in respect of inflammable materials and sprinklers and could be reduced to 11 metres. So again, it's a constantly moving debate about what is an HRRB and what height of building is technically classed as high. What was interesting for me, and this is a quote that was repeated in the Raising the Bar report, is this quote which they referred to, taken from the Building a Safer Future report. And this is another quote from Dame Judith. And I think the important thing for me about this quote, and you'll hear this theme appearing again, is this issue of leadership. Is that what government in the UK and those who have been tasked with trying to drive forward the change in industry keep referring back to is the lack of, and therefore the need for, leadership from the industry. And this comes back to our own findings in terms of this cultural change, this behavioural change needs to start from the top down. So just to wrap up, there's a lot to digest there. I do appreciate that, and thank you for your attention. There is a lot more, and maybe if you have any questions, we can pick it up a bit later. What have I learned on this journey? Well, the first thing I would say I've learned on this journey is that what we do as an industry matters. It's important. It's important to the economy. You know, a significant proportion of GDP is created by our industry, but it's also important to society. And for me, when it comes to that, it underlines the fact that what we do and how we do it makes a difference to people's lives and livelihoods, and particularly when we get it wrong. So for me, it's not just about doing it right, it's about doing the right thing. And this talk is about professionalism in the context of quality, and I think that as professionals, we all have a responsibility for the reputation of industry and to do the right thing. And that also extends to the well-being and the safety of those who use the buildings and the infrastructure that we create. And as you probably have gathered from this presentation, there's still a lot of work to do. And everybody in this room, we all have a responsibility, not only to keep up to date with what's happening in industry, to make sure that we're passing that message on. And I'd like to finish with this quote by the father of quality management, W. Edwards Deming. Quality is everyone's responsibility, and we never have to stop getting better. Thank you very much.